Welcome to Almost Pro. We're told sport prepares you for life, builds discipline, builds character, builds resilience. But when the jersey comes off, why do some athletes thrive in the workplace and others struggle?
Being good at sport doesn't automatically make you employable. So what actually transfers and what doesn't?
And you know what, Laura? Being good at sport doesn't automatically make you a good coach either, right?
Yes, exactly. That is
Right.
correct.
So, look, in this conversation, Laura and I wanted to set the tone. We're not looking to create a motivational piece for athletes or some LinkedIn sermon. We want to have a real conversation about what translates when an athlete finishes their career, particularly in our context, where an athlete hasn't got to the place in their career that they've been spending all of their life aspiring to, and they need to pivot. So, understanding what employers value and what athletes need to build intentionally to be employable.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this one. There's so many different aspects to this. There's, when you start out as a junior in any kind of sport or you start your journey in sport, you are constantly given direction, right? So there's this whole idea then, does sport actually prepare you for life after sport? If you're
Mm,
constantly under direction in sport, is that always the case when you leave sport? And we know that it's not.
no, it's certainly not in the workplaces of today, right? Where there's the word autonomy, I reckon, is used from pre-interview,
Yeah.
through every step of your career. You're hearing it all the time. If you've spent all of your time thriving because coach is directing you, or because someone else is lifting weight that offsets what you probably are not great at, suddenly when you're leaving sport, it becomes really evident that there's a hole. There's a hole in your toolkit. There's a hole in the way that you're going to respond in a workplace because you don't really know the true concepts of autonomy. I don't know that that's true for everyone though. And I also believe that there are so many other skills that come with being an athlete, that come with a life in sport, that come with a life of looking at achievement. So constantly trying to push yourself harder. That I don't think people who aren't in sport or aren't in high performance or elite level athletes, I don't think they can bring at the same levels that these athletes can.
Yeah, great points. In sport, there's so much structure there, there's so much discipline, and you have this work ethic that is just instilled in you to just keep going, to be consistent with what you're doing and to improve. And so you work at this level of achieving the goals that you want to achieve within your sport from such a young age that people who come from outside of sport don't necessarily have exposure to. Their working career often can start that igniting of that work ethic in them. Whereas people who have played sport their whole lives, they have to have that in order to go anywhere within their sport. So it's
Yeah.
almost like you're working at two different rates when we speak about work ethic a lot of the time. I think another factor here is it comes down to what kind of sport, because
Yeah.
sports are different. There's individual sports, there's team sports. They all operate differently. We talk about the NFL having a play-by-play situation with their coach, as opposed to, say, golf or swimming or
Yeah.
tennis, or where it's just you out there.
Yeah.
So you're the person that's having to think a little bit more autonomously and strategically to adapt and make changes. Whereas someone who comes from the NFL, it's more of a play by play. Okay, this is the plan. This is the function you're going to perform, and then this is when we stop. And if you perform that function to its entirety, your job essentially is complete. Whereas we know
Yeah.
when you step into a corporate environment that there is no play by play. You need
Mm,
to, like you said, you need to think autonomously, you need to work autonomously. There is no rule book.
mm,
I've often
mm.
heard people say to sport people come into the corporate environment, say, "How do you know what to do?" And it's, but that's that mind shift, right? That's that understanding as well that they've grown up with. Their coaches told them what to do, and now there's no one there to guide them.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder whether there's a line that kind of has the shift in it. So when you're playing sort of at that community level, you're not playing necessarily for keeps, I think is probably the terminology. You're not playing with the intent that you are going to professionalize, that this is going to be your career, that this is going to be where where you'll be fed from fundamentally. So I think there's a line that says in community sport there is still a ton of adaptation required because you still have time to work part-time jobs. You still have time to,
Yeah.
build skills alongside your sporting. But once it's a career and you're moving into high performance and you're moving into the elite requirements, you don't have capacity to build skills alongside training hours and particularly,
Yeah.
the ages we see some of these shifts take place. If you're schooling at the same or at uni at the same time as you're building a high performance career, you don't have time to go and work a part-time job. And we've talked about this before, that the financial element, if you've got financial freedom and you don't have to grind in trying to keep a job down at the same time as growing in your athlete pathway, go you. Like that's an
Yeah.
amazing. But the truth of it is taking an elite pathway costs hours and hours in every week. So
Mm.
oftentimes the stories you and I are hearing are of young people missing out on the opportunity to be involved in workplaces and for reasonable hours. Maybe they'll be able to do short hours and short shifts and here and there, but they're taking blocks of time off for competitions that aren't held in their hometown. They're needing to mark themselves unavailable. They're not easy employees to have during those high sporting years. So when we're talking about what's converting then when they're leaving sport, I reckon that's the crux of this. It's about saying, um, what did you take with you when you finished sport? What did you take with you? And I think Carol Fox, who we had on an earlier
Yeah.
episode, I think she talked about this to some degree, where she was sort of saying lots of athletes don't even realize what's transferable.
Mm.
Lots of athletes look immediately to the sport they're leaving. And I don't even know if that's healthy in lots of situations.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're leaving on good terms, then maybe that all feels good. But the reality is lots of people don't leave on their own terms. They leave because of injury, they leave because of selection issues, they leave because of personalities, they leave because of money, and all of the things we've talked about before. But if they're leaving on terms that don't feel like they're in full control, they're probably not looking to their sport and its institution or its framework of employment, coaching and other jobs as a place of how I can grow here, where people already know them, where people already know their capabilities, their
I was
personality.
about to say they're leaving before they've figured it out.
Yeah, they
That's
haven't got to
right.
pick up all of it and try and
Mm.
convince someone else they've got transferable skills when their every waking hour was spent playing tennis or their every waking hour was spent in gymnastics. And we know that there are a great number of these sports where lots and lots of retiring athletes end up back in that exact sporting environment, whether they're commentating, whether they're
Yeah.
coaching, whatever it is that they're doing as a role in amongst the environment. Um, they do tend to stick with it. So it's not that they throw sport up in the air and say, I'm done with this and it's not for me, but they still have to convince people that they've got something to offer that isn't out on the court or out on the mat or out in the field.
And it's a different pace too, right? Like if they're high performance, then they're used to the pressures. They're used to the
Yeah.
pressure of the environment, whether it's the intensity of their training or whether it's the pressure of performing in front of a crowd or achieving a certain victory in a tournament or an
Mm,
event. And
yeah.
then it's a whole different world of pressures when you move over into the corporate space and to the working space. The crowds aren't there, and how does that affect your performance? You know,
Yeah,
did you
yeah.
thrive in that? Do you not thrive in that? And then you've got to kind of figure out the dynamics of the corporate world.
And you're at the very same time, you're going through your identity shift.
Yeah.
So you're trying to convince people that you've got this offering, like, these are the things I'm really, really good at. But those people probably don't understand the heights that your sporting career climbed to because it's not sometimes if you're not in the sport, specifically in that sport, you probably don't even understand just how high someone has climbed. It's a
Yeah.
bit a bit like talking to someone in the military and you got no idea Like if you're a civilian who has no military understanding or context to lean in, those people could be telling you anything and you're like, I actually don't even know if you were an amazing soldier or whatever. Like I think in
Mm,
sport, if I've played football my whole life and you want to tell me a tennis story about how high you climbed in, another country perhaps, or a framework that I don't have reference points in, I might just think, I never saw you on TV. Your name isn't really household for me. You probably didn't do all that much, which is so untrue.
yeah.
But when we're looking to get out of sport into other jobs that are not sport based, it can feel like a really hard sell.
Absolutely. And not only that, but you touched on the skills, right? How do you
Mm,
identify what those transferable skills are? Not
mm,
as in how do you settle them with you eventually and come to an understanding, okay, I'm regrowing my identity out of sport, which is, you know, vitally important. But on a resume, what do you put? Really good at tennis, really
mm,
good at swimming, you know?
mm,
And then you start trying to think, okay, that means I'm adaptable. That means and you start trying to identify through research, through conversation, through learning. Maybe you've gone back to university, whatever it may be, but you start learning to identify what are my key skills that are transferable. But then where do you fit? Where do you fit? Because you might not have spent 4 years doing commerce. So, okay, my understanding of how to make a sport organization financially viable is limited because I was in the pool or on the field or on the court. And
yeah.
so, where within the world of business do you actually fit? And I think
Mm,
that that can be a really huge struggle as well because you've got these skills that you start to identify and you go, okay, they're quite broad.
mm,
And then you
mm.
go, okay, well, how can I use them? Or what do I need to do next to make myself be able to fit in this corporate space, into this working space?
And set myself apart from every other applicant.
Right, and we all know that, jobs are few and far between no matter what your industry is these days, let alone if we start talking about sport. Yeah.
Right. Right. And I think we do see lots of athletes convert into sport jobs. Like, we see it all the time. We see, big names
Mm,
convert into professions that are related to the sport they were involved in or higher, whether it's, Olympics or national bodies. We see that a lot. I think there's that layer that says, sport teaches us about effort, and it teaches us about repetition, doing that same thing. And, Dr. Damien Taylor spoke about this recently.
yeah,
Doing the same thing over and over and over again, is what creates high performance. We do it in volume. We do tons of it. So sport
mm,
teaches us those things, but the corporate world rewards different things. It rewards your ability to prioritize. It rewards your ability to delegate. And if you've been an individual athlete in particular, who are you sending that to? Like
yeah,
you're it. Yeah, as we've talked about before, you're it. You're out there. You're on your own. Um, it rewards long-term thinking. And when we look at the distinction between the two, they don't they don't overlap. They conflict,
yeah,
right? Where if you've been focused on that sporting career, then you're not looking at the what next because you're in it. You're in the thick of it. The what
mm,
next is, how do I climb higher? How do I get better? How do I do more in this space to be more seen, more visible, more sponsorable, more whatever? But in the athlete framework, you're not thinking that any day now this falls, where am I going? What am I going to do next?
yeah,
How am I going to fill these same hours every day? Because you're not for a second contemplating that, everything that sits around you is just going to drop away. That your coach is no longer the person you speak to more than anyone else in your life. That
yeah,
in team sports, that your teammates are your be all and end all, and they see you more. At elite levels, they're seeing more of you at special occasions than your family are. They've probably shared more birthdays with you than your family have since you've been involved in the sport, because you can't just go home whenever you like. That's the commitment that you're making. And the corporate world is saying, what does all of that mean for me? What's in it for me? what's in it for
Yeah.
us, because we've got another applicant in the same pool applying for the same job who's actually just finished a 4-year degree in this specific field, who's actually, spent years building a career to get to the point where they're applying for this specific job. How are your skills transferring? Yeah.
It's such a great point. It's a tough spot to be. I think as well while you were saying with the repetition, as past athletes, do we rely on that adrenaline too much in the
Mm,
workplace as
mm,
well?
mm,
It's I know from my own experience that if you put an athlete in a position a lot of times and you tell them, okay, well, this is the role that you're going to be functioning in, they almost live off the adrenaline of it. And so they get it done really, really fast because they're living for that. Okay, done this. Now what's next? Now what's next? And it's a little bit like, okay, well, that was going to take us 2 weeks. So let's just calm down
mm,
and,
mm.
and then we'll go step by step into the next one. And as athletes, you can do that. And now, time for a short break. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to join the Almost Pro community and stay up to date with the latest episodes and news. To find out more or to apply to be a guest, visit almostpropodcast.com today.
There's also so much time pressure in sport. So there's you're not going to be here forever. You're not going to
Right.
be this active forever. You're in the peak window now. Make sure you're doing it all now. And I reckon that converts when you're leaving sport to the same conversations feeling just as heavy. You're a bit older than the other applicants. It's a bit old to, you're a bit
Yeah.
old to start from zero. Yeah, and I don't know that there are too many retiring athletes that don't already feel it. They don't need to be reminded that. And sorry, I should have said from the outset, there are a great number of sporting teams, of sporting codes, and of government entities across the globe that are working in this space. They that are providing so much support for
A
athletes
growing
for when
number.
position. We're
Yeah.
not dismissing that. Not for 1 second are we suggesting everyone's going in blind. But I think when you're leaving sport behind, it can be really easy to pursue sport as your only career because it just feels the most familiar. And oftentimes that is what the models are growing us into. They're growing us, you're leaving sport as an athlete, but you're coming back. Well, we need you as a manager, or we need you as a coach, or we need you in this space.
Yeah. And how does it affect your confidence
Yeah.
when you start this? Like you mentioned, maybe you're a little bit older or, how does that
Yeah.
affect your confidence?
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
spent your life working towards, perfecting a set of skills and you've become really competent at that. You've become really good at that. Okay, well, now put them totally away. And we need you to have that same level of confidence and conviction in what you're going to do next, which by the way, you don't know what that is. So
Yeah.
that's a tough space to be in.
Yeah. And depending what level you've played at or performed at or, where you've been in your organization's hierarchy, there is some support available to you or there's not. There might be a great deal of support available to you in some sports. And honestly, there are so many coming to mind that are just doing this very, very well. Um, but it's not all of them. And I think there's a reminder needed that says with most people are retiring from high performance sports in their 20s and 30s. There is still
Mm.
a very, 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 very long time left in their working career, right? So not to this is not to spark fear. This is just the realities of what transitioning can
No,
include,
but that's a mindset shift in itself, right? You
right?
you you know in your sport, okay, I'm, getting late 20s, early 30s. That's the end of my career. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it might be time to move away from the sport, maybe from a performance perspective. I don't know, it's different in every sport, but it's not the end of your working career, your working ability, and I think that alone
No,
is a mental hurdle you need to get past.
because the terminology is aging out. You've aged
Right,
out,
exactly, yeah.
right?
Yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
everything? Like, am I
Yeah,
aged out?
exactly.
And because socially, there's a ton of pressure on, like, milestones at life points and
Yep.
things that you're supposed to have done by certain ages and achieved by certain ages. So we certainly don't need more of that on top of an
No.
athlete who's perhaps aging out or maybe just injured Maybe they're injured and they're leaving long before they even
I feel like
contemplated.
we
Yeah.
need to pick me up. Let's go 4 skills that can be transferred into the workplace from sport.
You want me to hit them or you're gonna hit them?
I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start with being adaptable. You
Yep.
gotta adapt every point, every play, being really adaptable.
Yep. Communication.
Oh, I love that one. Yes.
Because irrespective of if you're playing an individual sport or you're playing a team sport, ultimately you're dealing with a lot of people. There's a lot of people involved
Yep.
in every step of your sporting journey. So communication is mine.
Work ethic, which I touched on earlier, but work
Yeah.
ethic. It's a never say die attitude, which is it's a old and golden saying in sport, but never say die, and I think that translates a lot of the time into your standard work ethic.
Um, Advocacy. So the
Yeah.
ability to champion what you need, but also to see what's needed around you.
Oh, yeah, that in fact, that's absolutely, and I'm gonna add one more here. I know I said 4 and I've lied, but one
Or
more, feedback. Your ability to take feedback in a constructive way, not as criticism, not as shooting you down or trying to stunt your growth and development, but feedback as a tool to move you forward. Taking
uh,
on feedback.
which don't you think links? There's kind of this link when you're talking about feedback to, um, like emotional regulation or ego management. You know, this management of
Absolutely.
self, I think, is kind of the other overlay, and that in current times more than ever,
Yeah.
the ability to self-regulate, the ability to manage your own ego in a world that rewards, putting self first, um, the ability to understand where your emotions will land you and what you need to do to rein them back in different situations where fundamentally they spike because you're out of control. You've lost control of a situation or you're not the person who's controlling the situation.
Yeah.
And I reckon transferring that into a workplace is so underrated.
Absolutely agree. Your ability to go into a performance review and be like, "Yes, how can I get better?" as opposed to, "Why am I here? What have I done wrong?" and then just straight into defensive mode, like, big difference.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I wonder though with athletes whether like there's actually a little bit of too prone to seeking feedback. Like, yeah, I can do that. I can change that. Sure, give me more, give me more. Because again, you've had it for so long. And that has
Yeah.
been your rudder. It's been what has suggested you either need to pivot left or right. Right.
Yeah, and I absolutely. When that feedback becomes really ambiguous, it's like, "I'm sorry, can you just say that again with a little bit more direction?" Like, "Where
Yeah.
specifically?" And it's like, "No, we just need this." "Yeah, but more specifically." Definitely.
But if I was doing this, how would you expect me to respond?
Let me just call my coach.
Actually, you are now my coach.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so true. I wonder, you and I had talked previously about the 7 pillars of an athlete being developed, right? So how an
Yep.
athlete emerges, what are the 7 pillars that underpin them? We talked about those being timing, luck, determination, talent, finance,
Mm,
location, and health, generally speaking. When it comes to employability, so you've needed those things to reach certain levels of athlete climbing, right? Like you've needed all of that to line up for you. And one of them falling down might actually be why you've retired or why you're no longer pursuing sport and you're now in this situation looking for a
right.
job somewhere outside of being an athlete. What do you think of those 7? What do you think transfers most readily, I suppose, outside of sport?
Yeah, it's my first instinct was to say that we can put luck to the side, but I don't think that we can. Sport is a very difficult uh, world to crack into work wise. To get a role in sport, it's one of the most high demand industries in the world. And getting roles in those a lot of the times just come down to how you're positioning yourself and just a little teaspoon of luck on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even people like Angus have acknowledged what a blessing it was, an unexpected blessing. With a little bit of luck, they were able to land this role, and we know that he's
Mhm.
fantastic in what he does. And so I think we can't sort of put that to the side. I'm not really sure what I would narrow down here, because I feel like there's an element of each of these that could play. Location. Well, I mean, if you're not in the right location for a certain workplace or role, then that plays a factor.
It's also so role specific, right? Like
It is.
if you're wanting to stay in sport, you wanna hope luck's on your side. You wanna hope that luck it sits right at the very top. I mean, timing is also pertinent, but sport
Mm,
fundamentally operates from a basis of a whole series of institutions. And
yeah.
if you are not well positioned in those institutions, it's highly plausible that you're not looking for work in those institutions either.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, like, talent, for example, is not going to be playing a huge role, but I think they have different weights and different
Yeah.
impacts.
I don't know that the 7 pillars are that easily transferable into what you can take into a workplace. I think they are very specific for what an athlete requires to be their best in an athlete world. I do
Yeah,
think though that, the skills that you've taken into building your athlete career that are most transferable are the ones we talked about. And then the really obvious, I think we could almost say they're the back end things of like, um, self-starting is one.
yep,
So being a self-starter, having good time management, your ability to work with others, your ability to communicate with others, your ability to self-regulate, be self-aware, and then there's the second layer of things like, do you have any level of financial literacy? Are you
mm,
able to manage down? I think they're the things that athletes will probably take for granted and not
yep,
realize they've developed on their athlete journey. If I had to think about it, I would say what sport has done for me in business. So outside of Almost Pro, you and I both have completely different hats that we wear in different parts of our lives. I would say from a business perspective, one of the most valuable skills that sport has taught me is how to stand back up. Because
yeah,
one thing you know for sure is you're gonna take a hit in sport. You're gonna lose. Things aren't gonna go your way. There's gonna be times where, particularly for me, playing sport as a soccer or football player, um, where you disagree with the ref's decision. There's nothing you can do about it.
just once or twice disagreeing with the
Just
refs,
once or
or
twice. Yeah, look, that's once or
yeah,
twice. Once or
right, yeah,
twice. But there's a lesson in that, right, of you are not always going to hold the power privilege in a situation.
yeah,
In fact, when you're starting out in your career, you got none of it. So you want to hope that you've developed skills enough that teach you to move on when you've hit a setback, when things don't go your way. I reckon there's something in sport that teaches us how to deal with things not going our way. And for me, while I've taken so much out of playing sport, so much that's transferred into the way that I manage teams or I am involved as a teammate, um, that I learnt from early years as sport as a foundation, but nothing more than how to respond in a setback. What about you?
I actually very similar. I agree with you, but for me, if I was going to weigh up the 7 pillars and say, okay, what have I taken from that, going from tennis into corporate world? Determination. I think you can be out of luck. You have maybe finished up your playing career. Maybe your talent that you used in that sport is no longer needed. Maybe you're in a terrible location. Maybe you don't have any financial understanding of anything. Maybe the timing is terrible, but you know what doesn't fade is
Mm,
determination. Your
mm,
determination to get to the right location. Your
yeah,
determination to literally never give up. And I think
yeah,
that that is so instilled in you as an athlete, that the one thing that no one can take away, no matter if they've taken away everything, no one can take away your determination. And I
yeah,
think that a lot of the times, if nothing else, that's what separates an athlete getting into a workplace. And that's one of the things I love about seeing athletes thrive in working environments, because
yeah,
even when they're not, I have this confidence that you're going to figure it out. You're going to get there because you're
yeah.
determined. Even if you
Yeah.
don't mean to be, you're determined, and I
Yeah.
love it.
There's a code of knowing, isn't there? You know,
Yeah.
like between athletes and people who have pushed themselves in a sporting career, I I can have a confidence if they're around me that they're not quitting. They are not
Yep.
giving up. They are just not giving up. Having said that, there may be moments where some toys get thrown out of cots and then they come good. Sometimes there needs to be a little chanty for them to come good, but still they will come back. They will
Yeah.
correct. They'll course correct, they'll jump back on and they keep moving. Was there anything when you were involved in tennis and your sporting career, was there anything you thought would matter more when you started looking for work and it just didn't?
I think status within the sport is
Yeah.
probably the key thing. And I
Yeah.
think that still matters greatly when it comes to coaching and when organizations are choosing coaches. Unfortunately, I think it matters more than what it should. A lot more than what it should, but that's a podcast for another day. But
Yeah.
it's when it's all of the other skills that I think you need to focus on. If you can remove the ego, separate yourself from whatever status it was, and just really reflect on what your skills are and what you can add, there's going to be so many more than what you realize.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So
that for
true.
me is the key.
So true. I think the big question is, if you stripped away sport completely, so if you remove sport from someone, what's left? What parts of you are still employable? And there is a lot more conversation in this space than there ever has been before. There are more and more commentators taking to the lectern to discuss
Yep.
identity post sport, that to discuss transitioning out of sport, to discuss, who am I without my jersey? And we've talked about it. Many, many people are talking about it. I think when it comes to working out how employable you are, if you took that sporting jersey of whatever sort off and took away the team that's involved with sport, what's left of you? And I reckon there's way more than athletes give themselves credit for most of the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Totally agree.
What I love about this is it links so neatly to so many of the other conversations we've had, and it links beautifully to conversations we've got coming up, with
Absolutely.
guests that we've got recording in the coming weeks. I think, um, the more we share these stories and the essence that is Almost Pro, the sharing of stories that say, "It wasn't necessarily easy, but I did it, and what I learnt along the way was I had loads and loads of skills that I'd been developing while I was in the pool, while I was on the mat, while I was on the court, um, and here I am now doing these things." I think the more we hear those stories, the more it helps the person who's making that move right now.
Absolutely. And in amongst the conversations, like you said, like Damien's episode actually gave you the tools to have
Yeah.
a starting base, and Carol's episode as well. Fantastic examples of, okay, if you are a little bit lost in this, or you're wondering, okay, I no longer have my coach in my ear 24/7, where do I
Mm,
go? There's
mm.
2 great resources right there where you can get pen and paper and you can go, I can see this written down. This is the next steps I'm taking for me to be able to move forward. And I think the fact that we have these platforms now to be able to find these tools to move forward is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
Francis, this conversation has been fantastic. I love it when we have these chats and really dive into these topics. For those that have been listening today, we hope this has been helpful. We hope that if you are navigating the next stages of life after sport, that this gives you somewhere to start and somewhere to grow from, and that you'll join us in next week's episode. For now, have a great week, and we will see you next week.